Thanks, Gavin. My name's Brad Gurrie. I'm the CEO of Socialsuite. So, over the next 10 minutes, what I'll be doing is really an extension of that last session that we saw from the panel, but providing some very practical examples of how organisations have been able to leverage ESG to create value within their organisations. So we're just going to do 5 minutes, a bit of scene setting, and then I'm going to ask Mike to come up to the stage and we can talk about Helix Resources' journey around ESG. To set the scene, I'll just share a bit of information about Socialsuite. As an organisation, we're working with nearly 160 organisations around the world. Around about 100 of those organisations are listed, publicly traded businesses, with the majority of those organisations on the ASX. These are typically mining resource companies that we're working with, but we are sector agnostic in terms of the organisations that we're working with. We have a partnership with OTC Markets, and we've got customers across the New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, and the TSX as well. Now, one of the things that we heard in the last session was really around some misconceptions around ESG. There's definitely a lot of rhetoric, and there's also some misconceptions. So hopefully what I'll do here is dispel two of the key ones. And the first one is really ESG is only for sustainable organisations. Now, this is not the case. Whether or not you're operating in a green sector or potentially into a brown sector, ESG is actually for all organisations, and it's primarily there as a way of being able to communicate your non-financial disclosures to investors. So we've got organisations that are lithium, battery minerals, and then we've also got oil and gas companies disclosing their ESG credentials. The last one, and it was a question that was just asked in the final part of that session, which is a misconception. It's a relatively new one, and the ASIC chair has been speaking about it quite a lot in the last few weeks, which is really around green hushing. So we know a lot about greenwashing. It's a fairly new term, which is green hushing, and it's essentially organisations not disclosing anything around ESG. So this is another misconception. What we're seeing now, it's an important thing is to disclose ESG information. So moving on from some of the misconceptions, really want to talk about what are the value creation around ESG. At Socialsuite, we really focus on the three C's of value creation for ESG. That's capital, that's compliance, and also customers. I'd like to give a couple of examples of how organisations have actually been able to create value around that. So we recently had Mitch Thomas, who's the CFO of Latin Resources, speak at one of our events, and he spoke about Latin Resources last year raising $35 million, and $15 million of that actually come from a cornerstone ESG investor out of Canada. So that's a really great example of a Socialsuite customer using their ESG reporting to access capital. The next one is around compliance and risk management. At the same event, we had Chris Stevens from Coda Mineral talking about a very substantial government grant that they've applied for. A quarter of the questions that they were asked was around ESG. Chris was easily able to satisfy a lot of those questions that the government was asking on the basis of the preparation that they've been able to do with the ESG reporting. And the last one is an example of customers, and this is the third area that organisations are able to create value, is being able to access customers and engage supply chain. Now, FYI Resource is a customer of ours. They use their ESG reporting as a way of being able to negotiate with large customers, and also talk about from customers that we have is around supply chain and being able to work through that, being able to satisfy those larger organisations' ESG requirement. So they're the three C's of ESG and how we help organisations create value through that. We firmly hold the view is that all organisations should be reporting upon ESG, And what we know is that there's a whole range of types of reporting maturity. We can help organisations to get started from a baseline example, and this is where we work largely with explorers in terms of getting them ready to start to report upon ESG. And what will progressively happen as they start to mature is that the ESG reporting becomes more complex and the requirements increase, adding multiple frameworks and other reporting requirements for organisations. Then ultimately, once those organisations get to a 10 billion plus market cap, they'll be looking at very bespoke needs, which is largely satisfied through internal consulting. What we look at is a very clear 5-step process, which starts with an initiation phase, alignment, and then around communication and engagement. So these are the first 3 steps of the phases of being able to start with ESG reporting. And then ultimately, organisations move into an optimise and an expand phase as well. So we've defined these 5 clear steps to help organisations get started on their ESG journey and make it quite simple. Now I'd like to invite Mike Rosenstroich to the stage to answer a couple of questions around their experience with ESG. Let's sit down. Mike, welcome. Thanks for joining the session today. It'd be great just to understand a little bit about Helix's journey and the reasons that you've adopted ESG reporting at Helix Resources.
Is this on? Yes. Thanks, Brad. Helix is a micro cap. We're on the very left-hand side of the graph that Brad showed before in terms of our activities. The reason that we took on ESG reporting was because it enables all of our stakeholders to view the company through a different lens, a lens that is not just focused on financial statements or not just focused on technical reports. And so it improves accountability and transparency with all of our stakeholders, including in the business community and inside the organisation. And it also enhances our ability to attract and retain talent because they can see broadly what our broader values are and they share those values with us. So it's an avenue to be able to report that. Ultimately ends up in terms of transparency and accountability, and that's about building relationships. And if you have strong relationships, that enhances your ability to grow your business. And also, it enhances your ability to sensibly solve problems should they arise with any of those stakeholders.
Thanks, Mike. So we spoke about the 3 C's of ESG value creation. How's Helix been able to create value through the adoption of ESG?
Remember, in the context of a junior explorer, I guess there's a couple of aspects. One, it's certainly a gateway with respect to a range of investors. Not all investors by any means. But what I've found, particularly interacting with European, UK-based investors more so, is that they either presume that you have an ESG framework or they expect one. So that's been a key aspect. And I think the other side has been internally in how we deal with our employees and our key people. That's been an enhancement too.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I mean, that's a really interesting point, particularly in Europe, organisations doing business in Europe. There is certainly an expectation of ESG reporting. Maybe as a final question, Mike, as now somebody that's got a few runs on the board with ESG, what advice would you give other organisations that are looking to embark on the ESG journey?
I'm not sure about how many runs we have on the board. Look, we're early days. We're a year into this process. Advice, presumptuously, I'd say fit for purpose. But the key thing is don't regard ESG as a compliance issue. Regard it as an opportunity to build a platform that actually enhances your business. Remember, enhances that accountability and transparency in terms of both growth opportunities, investment capital, talent retention, but also a platform for dealing with the not so positive things like disputes or issues that arise. So it's not a compliance issue, it's an enhancement to the business process.
Well, Mike, thanks for joining us on stage today to share your insights of Helix Resources and the journey that you've been on around ESG. If anyone's interested in finding out more information around ESG, Socialsuite has a stand just over there on the right-hand corner there. I'd love to answer any further questions that might arise. But Mike, once again, thanks for joining the stage and congratulations on your commitment around ESG.